All of you here as our special coverage on night 2 of the Democratic National Convention continues. We are coming to you live from the United Center here, and things are set to kick off, looking at the clock, just about 90 minutes from now. And if the phrase du jour last night was pass the torch, tonight it's turn the page, with the focus shifting now from President Biden to Vice President Harris. You're taking a live look at the stage there. They're doing a sound check on the Star-Spangled Banner. That stage is where later tonight you are going to see some of the party's biggest and most popular stars. Former President Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama. They're going to be preceded by the man hoping to become the first gentleman, Doug Emhoff. And for Democrats, it's going to be a bit of a split-screen situation here, because the two people this whole thing is built around will be holding a separate rally of their own next door in swing state Wisconsin. Call it not quite counter-programming, but complementary programming, perhaps. But from Democrats' political opponents, no compliments and plenty of countering from former President Trump and his running mate, both on a battleground blitz tonight in Wisconsin and Michigan. All of it is back here in Chicago. We are watching the potential for another protest that is set to begin later on tonight. We've got a big team covering every angle of it as our rolling coverage continues right here on NBC News Now. I want to start with Monica Alba down on the convention floor, because, Mon, you have some new reporting literally in the last couple of minutes from your many sources on what we will hear from the Obamas tonight. This is going to be a big moment of this convention week, so fill us in. What should we expect?
Well, Hallie, absolutely. And as they are finishing up a sound check of the national anthem behind me, I will tell you that tonight they are expecting both of these speeches from former President Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama to be high wattage in the attention, but incredibly meaningful in their message. I'm told by people who have seen the speeches, which we're told former President Obama was still working on last night, making some adjustments to today. They're going to be talking about the stakes in this election and that nothing can be taken for granted. They're going to stress that this is an all-hands-on-deck situation and approach, which is likely why you're seeing Vice President Harris go to Milwaukee with her running mate to hold a rally, because they're trying to stress this notion that no second can be wasted in the next 75 days. And specifically, what Michelle Obama is going to speak to is this idea of turning the page, as you referenced in your introduction, on fear and division. Those are the themes I'm told she's going to be raising tonight in her remarks, in addition to talking about her relationship with Vice President Harris. Now, the Obamas didn't come out and endorse her immediately the way that the party rallied around her after Joe Biden exited the race. They wanted to wait a couple of days, let that process play out. But when they did, they called her, and a campaign turned that into an ad of sorts featuring that very moment. So she's going to talk about how she's been in regular touch with VP Harris and about what she believes she will be able to accomplish if she's elected the first female president as well. And as for President Obama, he's going to say, look, this is a situation where people can't not get complacent. That's something we've heard from both of them before, but they're really going to stress that. And they are going to be talking about this in the terms of who Vice President Harris is facing when it comes to Donald Trump. The two of them sometimes are a little more artful in their language, but I'm told you'll know who they're talking about when they reference him and when they reference what's at stake just 75 days from now, Hallie.
Okay, so an all-hands-on-deck situation is how, of course, former President Obama is going to phrase it, Mom. But here's a question. One of the most memorable moments from Michelle Obama, one of the last times she took the convention stage, was that line about when they go low, we go high. We saw some sharp attacks here at the DNC on night 1 against former President Trump. Do you have any sense of whether she's going to reprise that a bit, or has that tone shifted for her? Do we know?
I've been asking people that all day long, and my sense is that there's an awareness, that there's an evolution to that idea, that what that message meant in 2016 simply implies that the circumstances of today could not be the same for her to give it again, if that makes sense. That is what the Democrats were saying in 2016 before the election and before they saw, they would argue, what Donald Trump did when he was in office and the way he treated the office, and that may no longer necessarily apply, is the idea that I have gotten from from people close to both of the Obamas. That is just certainly something that in this reality, in this political moment, she wouldn't repeat, but that there is something rooted in that in terms of how you can act, that Michelle Obama, as a former First Lady, does like to speak to, about some kind of civility when possible, and about having a political discourse that never ventures into political violence and those kinds of ideas. But I think it's something that certainly people will be thinking about. So it would be hard for me to imagine that they're not thinking about that too, in terms of the speech writing and where that message has evolved to 8 years later. And it was so notable last night, as you mentioned, Hallie, that former Secretary of State, former Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, she was smiling and nodding when the crowd broke into those chants of lock him up, lock him up, of course, referencing what Donald Trump had said about her. And that's just an example of that the when they go low, we go high, just simply isn't how Democrats are approaching Donald Trump anymore. Hallie.
Monica, we just got a pretty sweet bird's eye view look of you and your team, your crew there on the convention floor. What's it looking like? Give us the vibe check. I'm turning around. It's starting to fill up a little earlier than last night, I should say, by the way. At this point, 24 hours ago, it was still fairly empty.
Yeah, and this was something that they decided today. The programming is going to kick off earlier than intended because of how late things went last night. And that is something in terms of the fluidity of the schedule that we should note for people, because they attributed that to the thunderous and raucous applause that delayed the speakers. And that is why President Biden, who was supposed to give a speech in prime time, ended up basically from Monday into Tuesday with his remarks. So tonight they're going to try to get in there earlier so that that doesn't happen with the speech from the Obamas. But the other thing about tonight, Hallie, and I think what you're sensing too, is there's going to be this roll call that's a bit unconventional, and there are some musical elements and some people appearing remotely that we were told we don't want to miss. So people here are kind of excited for that too.
I saw you powering through that common sound check earlier, so we know at least one of the, of course, music stars who will be here. Monica Alba, thank you very much, friend. Appreciate it. Kristen Welker is with us in the booth, as is Chuck Todd. Jensaki is joining us from back home in Washington as well. It's good to be with you all. So let's pick up on where Monica left off here. And Kristen and Chuck, we'll start with you. And then, Jen, I want to get to you on some of the relationship piece of it. What's the thing you're going to be watching for tonight? Because there's a lot at play. There's a lot of interesting dynamics, a lot of relationship dynamics here. When you look at the Obama's relationship with Vice President Harris versus the Obama's relationship with President Biden.
Well, look, you know, to me, one of the fairest critiques of Barack Obama, politician, was, and I was mentioning this to you earlier, Kristen, is that the one thing he didn't do was designate an heir. Yeah. Right? You know, there wasn't really, and, you know, it was awkward that he was choosing between Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, arguably neither of whom were heirs to what Obama, how he shifted the movement and how he moved the party and where he moved the party. I'm curious tonight. I'm not going to sit here and predict anything, but I'm curious tonight is, does he sort of give the vibe, to borrow a word that we're all going to be overusing this election, it seems, that he's making the case that she's the natural heir. That, you know, when you know, look, we like narratives. Journalists like narratives. Frankly,
but
human beings like narratives. We want to know that there are through lines, that it's all sort of interconnected. And how much he tries to do that and sort of embrace the idea, yeah, this is my natural heir. You know, the generation and, you know, and almost put himself with Biden, and we're handing it off to her. And in many ways, this is what you should have been expecting from a future president after I became president, type of thing. I'm not saying he would say it that personally, but that's what I'm looking for tonight. Does he sort of wrap his arms around the idea that she really is the natural successor to him? You know, in some ways, Clinton and Biden were transitional figures for the party.
Yeah. And she is going to be, we talked about this split screen moment, in a battleground state just next door, along with Governor Walz, her running mate here, in a pretty, I think, significant break from tradition. You don't normally see the person who's running, the person whose convention it is, showing up and counter-programming their own convention with their own rally, Kristen. She's got some goals that she wants to accomplish this week as well, and you're talking about that, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, she first of all, this is a sprint to the finish because she just got to the top of the ticket. So part of this is the reality of it. She wants to make sure she's making use of each day and stumping in these battles.
You're saying she doesn't have the luxury of taking a week off right now.
Yes, I think that that's part of the thinking inside the campaign. Now, I just asked Quentin Fulks, deputy campaign manager, the same question. Are you not counter-programming your own event here? And he said, look, particularly in the wake of what happened last night, everyone was up late trying to make sure that tonight goes seamlessly, and part of it is making sure that that choreography works very well. So I do think that there will be a real effort to make sure that it adds to, in the same way that she surprised everyone by walking out on stage last night and that got thunder or surprise, to make sure that it's that type of a moment. One note to your point about Obama, I think it will be so fascinating to listen to his tone. We know that he's actually been in very frequent contact with her, counseling her as she's made this transition. And so he's really been a part of this process in a very big way.
Jen, let me go to you on this, because one of the things that I've heard a lot from Democrats that I've been talking to here in Chicago is this idea that we love the word vibe on this show. We love talking about the vibes, but that the vibes are similar. People are referencing, well, listen, people are referencing 2008 and the movement behind Barack Obama and that hope and change movement that we all covered and talked about, et cetera. You lived through it, Jen. And the question I've been putting to people is, really, do you feel like we're there yet with Kamala Harris? That Democrats are there yet with her in the way that they were with Barack Obama back then? And so I put this to you. Are you getting that this is like a 2008 redo here in 2024?
Not exactly. I mean, I think it's very different because that was a complete grind for 2 years where I think Chuck and Kristen, you, Hallie, remember, nobody thought Barack Obama had a chance of winning that primary, never mind the presidency, right? So that was an entirely different campaign. But I do think the uplifting, the joy people are feeling, the desire to vote in favor of something instead of against the other guy, there is a similarity there. So I do expect, you know, I understand, and I think I can relate to people seeing that thing in common.
Former President Trump is already looking at in his campaign the way that President Biden and the way that some Harris staffers, now campaign staffers, have linked the policies of President Biden to Vice President Harris. This is something that Republicans are seeking to do, lash her to those policies, essentially. And frankly, President Biden, in his remarks last night, sort of did it himself. He talked about the accomplishments as he sees them in his first term and says these are Kamala Harris's as well. That potentially could be a double-edged sword and cut both ways. What does, for example, Barack Obama need to do tonight? What might he do to try to separate the two? Or do you think that's even part of the strategy here? Is it about policy, or is it more about establishing Kamala Harris, as Chuck said earlier, as the heir apparent here?
Yeah, look, I'm a policy nerd. I love policy. This campaign is not going to be won and lost on a huge policy book. She should be, of course, meeting with advisors and smart policy experts and deciding what she wants to do as president. But that's not what this campaign is going to be won or lost on, regardless of what Republicans or others are saying. I do think that tonight for Obama, it's about, one, putting his hand on her. And I don't know that he sees her as the heir apparent. I don't think he wants to, has never wanted to put his hand on anyone as the heir apparent. He's always seen that as the choice of the public. And he typically stays out of it, which frustrates and angers people. But that is his strategic approach to this. And I think it will continue to be. But he does respect her. He's known her for 20 years. He thinks she's tough. He thinks she's unflappable in a lot of ways. I'm sure he'll talk about her in a personal way, but also a substantive way, which I think is important for people to hear. And on Trump, I was listening to what Monica was saying. I think the party has shifted. I know you all have been talking about this, have talked about this before, has shifted in terms of the messaging on Trump. If you look at just a month or 6 weeks ago, it was building up Trump like he was this scary person who was going to end our universe.
Right.
Yes, end our democracy. There's still, of course, the threat of Trump. I would expect Obama and others to speak about. But his style is more also poking fun of him and talking about him as somebody who is self-involved and only cares about himself. And that, I think, is kind of one of the services he can do in his speech tonight. The last thing I'll say, Hallie, and I've been talking to some of his people as well, is, you know, his relationship with Joe Biden is complicated, as they say. It's complicated about relationships, but he loves him, right? He loves him. He loves him like a brother, and I think they've had some difficulty and awkwardness in their relationship over the past couple of weeks, but I think that is going to be the part of the speech that's probably the most heartfelt and personal.
Yeah, I'm just having flashbacks here because you have another guest that I don't want to introduce.
Spoiler, Tommy Vietor.
I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to remember. Did you take over Saki's office? And you were on the outside, right? Saki had an office.
No.
And you were like the peon.
Saki outranked me from beginning to end.
First of all,
she may still, candidly.
You got her office after she got out.
No, they wouldn't give me an office. I want to know, Chuck, it's important for everyone listening to know, watching to know that my first ever TV interview was with you. It was on an Obama foreign trip. You were nice enough to let me go on air, and my leg was shaking so much that I made the camera jiggle. I think you were like, "Hey, could you?"
Don't remember that, but
were you the first podcast?
Now Tommy and Saki, they're taking over the media.
Everything. I know.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting to hear Jen talk about the role that Obama doesn't like.
He doesn't want to be the kingmaker.
And it is something that many in the party have been frustrated with, right? It would be, and yet there's still a whole bunch of people that want him to play that role in some way. So whatever that means, I like the way Jen put it, which is sort of, I don't want this to come across as religious, but blessing her. Yeah. She's one of us.
Yeah, and there was frustration in this moment. There was frustration in 2020. Why is he not endorsing, his vice president? But then, after Joe Biden won South Carolina, it was former President Obama who sort of brought the party together and who said, okay, it's time to come together and get behind Joe Biden. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here, not just tonight, but again with this personal outreach to her.
To the other point that Jen is making, and not to make you a panelist here on the show, Tommy, but to join the conversation here.
Man, I hijacked your show.
That's all right. It's great.
That's what happened. You invite an ex-anchor in.
She's in the control room, like, what's up?
I'm a recovering one.
One of the things that Chuck and I talked about yesterday, actually with you, Kristen, here on set, was the idea that, as Jen has alluded to, in many ways, President Biden, when he was on top of the ticket here as of a month plus a day ago, looked to make former President Trump this ominous, maybe larger-than-life figure. Perhaps not intentionally, but that's how he cast him. And now, what you're seeing from, and I was struck by this, so many of the speakers on night one, they're making Donald Trump small. Just a regular sort of
weird, calling him
weirdo.
Weird.
Right. I mean, that's been the strategy now for several weeks. I wonder how you see that.
Yeah, he's a clown. He's a whiner. He comes out at events.
A loser is President Biden.
He whines about his golf game. I was mistreated by this person. I was upset about that. And I think when you have someone who has authoritarian tendencies, who wants to be seen as a strong man, one of the ways you cut them down is through humor and making fun of them and mocking them. And that doesn't mean you're diminishing the threat of a second Trump term. But I think when Democrats build up someone like Donald Trump, I think it plays into his narrative that I'm this big, strong man and I can fix it for you.
Right.
I alone can fix it. Yeah. And Obama is very good at cutting Trump in ways that get him to respond.
Hey, Jen, quick final thoughts to you, because I know you got to run in a second.
Look,
I know you hate to leave.
No, I hate to leave. I hate to leave.
This reunion show.
I do think the other piece here that is more symbolic, and I don't expect President Obama, former President Obama, to address this directly, but Tommy may disagree with me, is this notion that there's never been before this person who's been elected. I mean, meaning Barack Obama was a first, right? He didn't always wear that on his shoulder. He ran as somebody who wanted to bring the country together. That's also how Kamala Harris is running. But I think there will be some acknowledgement. Maybe it's just visual of it's possible, everyone. Everybody who thinks out there you can't elect a black woman, guess what? You elected Barack Hussein Obama. And that's a reminder to people watching at home and people in the convention hall as well.
Jensaki, thank you very much. Chuck, Kristen, thank you both. I'm only saying goodbye for a second because we've just got in here, and NBC News exclusive too. And Tommy, I want you to react to this. We're getting our first look here. One of the big speakers tonight, not just the Obamas, but of course the man hoping to become the first gentleman. That's Doug Emhoff. His son Cole will be introducing him, and we're getting our first look at about a minute of what that sort of bio intro will be. We want to play it and roll it right now.
My parents split when I was in middle school, and that wasn't easy. That's not easy for any kid. But it helped that my parents stayed friends, and we all kept hanging together. We grew closer than ever. And then he met Kamala, the blind date that would dramatically change all of our lives forever. It was my senior year of high school. Elle and I would laugh watching them fall in love, acting like teenagers. In 2014, Kamala became Mamala. She took over Sunday night dinners and taught Doug how to actually cook. Our blended family wasn't used to politics or the spotlight, but when Kamala became senator, we were all excited to step up, especially my dad. Then Kamala became vice president. It felt like Doug was a bit out of place on Capitol Hill. I thought, what is my goofy dad doing here?
The video continues on from there, but that again, Emhoff introducing his father in that biographical clip. We're going to see more of that coming up tonight. What's so interesting, you heard that line, Kamala became Mamala, very intentionally looking to humanize her, as in many ways, as campaign sources have said to me, they are looking to define her to a broader audience, not just as the VP, but as the presidential nominee.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to friends who have been doing a lot of focus groups, and there's a lot of white space there. A lot of people don't know who she is, what they would do for them, and I think you don't just fill in that space by saying, here's a bunch of policy papers. You say, here's this person, here's where they're from, these are their values, this is their family, and that informs their worldview. And I think most people probably don't know much about Doug Emhoff or their children. You've also had J.D. Vance, the weirdo, calling her, making fun of women who don't have children, calling her a childless cat lady. And in fact, she is a mom. She has a family. She has stepkids. And I think I come from a family where I have half-brother, and I don't think of him as lesser than anyone else in my family. And I think it's a very American story that people will understand. And I think that kind of bio piece will speak to that.
What kind of messenger do you think Doug Emhoff can be for her? There was a lot of dad energy meme things happening last night with him and Tim Walz up in the box as Kamala Harris walked out on stage.
Yeah, they were vibing in there. We had some kids doing bunny ears behind Tim Walz. I mean, I don't know. Doug Emhoff's been doing a lot of work combating anti-Semitism. That's not standard light fare for a first gentleman. I don't know what he'll be like tonight. I think he's a very successful lawyer in his own right. He's someone who's established himself, who's had a great career, and is, I think, sort of given a lot of it up to go into this new role. So I'm excited to see this speech. It's the thing I know the least about tonight.
There's also one of the things you probably know the most about, of course, are the Obamas, and we've been talking about that conversation, what that might be like. Jensaki said something interesting. She talked about, and I think this is very fair to say, the relationship is complicated there. There's a lot of love, but there's also some complications. How do you define that relationship between the Obamas and President Biden?
I mean, I think every president and vice president in history have had sort of strained political relationships. I mean, it's a marriage of political convenience or two people brought together because you think adding someone to the ticket gives you some benefit politically. And that was not untrue with Barack Obama and Joe Biden. I think the difference with them is a lot of presidents and VPs end up hating each other or the VP gets iced out. Joe Biden and Barack Obama were very close friends. When Beau Biden died, Barack Obama was there consoling him. He was telling him, not to mortgage his house to pay medical bills, that he would step in and help him out. And obviously, politics has strained that relationship over time. I think the story of 2016 has been mistold. I don't think well, a lot of people think that Barack Obama told Biden not to run in 2016 because he wanted Hillary Clinton to run. My understanding of that story is Barack Obama saw this man who had just been through hell, and he thought the worst thing you could do in that situation is run for office. That might have been the wrong assessment, but it was one made of love and brotherhood and care for his friend, not that some sort of crass political calculation.
Well, under the theme of sort of turning the page, as we're doing here, as Democrats are doing at the DNC, let me ask you then about the same question with Kamala Harris. How do you define the relationship between the Obamas and Vice President Harris?
They're genuinely friends. I mean, I was in Iowa in 2007 working on that campaign. Kamala Harris came and knocked doors for us.
New Year's Eve, right?
Yeah, she was out there knocking doors in the freezing cold. That was a cold New Year's Eve, and she came out there on her own dime, was doing work for us. So they've been buddies for a long time. He got in trouble at one point for saying she was the best-looking attorney general in the country, right? Remember that? He had to apologize. But they had a friendship where they could joke about stuff like that. Kamala Harris and Michelle Obama, I think, have grown close over time. The Obamas still live in D.C., so they would see each other. So they're actually, I think, quite close. And I believe the enthusiasm you see in the party about her candidacy is matched in the Obamas personally.
Do you think that there is that 2008 aura around Kamala Harris as there was around Barack Obama in the eyes of Democrats?
I feel it. I mean, I think...
That didn't sound like wholehearted. I mean, you feel it fully, or are you starting to feel it?
The difference, I think, is, look, in 2008, if John McCain had won, I was like, you know what? He's a war hero. He's a good man. I disagree with him politically, but he's going to do the right thing. If Donald Trump wins this election, I'm scared about the future of the country, democracy, everything, right? So the stakes are higher in that sense. But I also think that people are not just voting for an anti-Trump vote. I think people are excited about Kamala Harris. They want to vote for her. You see it in this crowd.
Let me ask you before you go, not to get too in the weeds on logistics here, but you posted something earlier that the goal here at the DNC is to deliver a message to help Kamala Harris win, not to maximize your own time on stage or to create a social media moment. Be team players was your message to the other speakers here. Are you also upset that you lost out on sleep last night because it was so long?
Yes, one, I'm exhausted. Two, I should never tweet. Three, no, it's just listen, if you're a member of Congress and you're given 5 minutes, speak for 5 minutes. There's a lot of people in a boiler room back there, speechwriters, trying to cut these things down, trying to make it a coherent night. And if you give them, 4,000 words when you were given 2 minutes, you're just not being a team player. It's not about you. It's not about your social media moment. This is about Kamala Harris electing her and delivering that message. So everybody's just got to keep it tight.
You in the mood to name names on any grandstanders?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll see.
Really good to see you. Thank
Great
you so
to see you
much.
too. Thank
Really
you for
appreciate
having
you
me.
coming in, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Appreciate it, Tommy. We've got a lot more to get to coming up, including, of course, what's happening not just here behind us on stage and on the floor at the DNC, but what is happening outside this United Center in Chicago. What could be another big night of protests at the DNC. We're going to get a check on how things are looking outside when we come back. Our special coverage here on NBC News Now continues. Welcome back to our live coverage here of night 2 of the DNC. And outside this building, you've got the Chicago Police Department, we're learning, bolstering those barriers. You see them there, that security fencing that's happening along the pre-approved protest route. That's after demonstrators tore down part of that fence and spilled out into the street there. We saw multiple arrests from that. Tonight's protest, the planned demonstration, is set to look slightly different, set to be in front of the Israeli consulate. The group behind it is called Behind Enemy Lines, operating under the slogan, Make It Great Like 68. That's a callback, of course, to those 1968 DNC protests against the Vietnam War, which turned into violent riots throughout the city of Chicago. NBC's Maggie Vespa is joining us now with more. So talk to us, Maggie, about what the expectation is for tonight and some of the fallout from last night as well. We were live with you as that was all happening right here in Chicago.
Yeah, for sure, Hallie. So we'll start with tonight. You can see, obviously, the police presence is already growing here in the city. We're just across the street from the Israeli consulate. And to that end, let me walk you over here to this corner. Excuse me, ma'am. And we're going to show you, you can see scaffolding and fencing already kind of lined up in front of the consulate. I mean, for reference, this isn't starting for a few hours here, so we expect the crowds to kind of fill this area, and we expect it to be a large turnout. Right now, from what we're hearing from our law enforcement sources and our analysts at NBC News, we're not anticipating a footprint like what we saw last night. It was about 6,000 people filling the streets of Chicago last night, but you point to the group Behind Enemy Lines. This is a much more confrontational group. This is a group that is often anti-police, anti-authority, and they are really expected to be a lot more confrontational. And you said just the name of the event itself, Make It Great Like 68, obviously reflecting back to the anti-Vietnam War protests of 68, has a lot of people on edge, especially after what we saw last night, Hallie. The superintendent, of Chicago PD talking about this earlier. Here's what he had to say.
You never know what to expect from a group like that. But what I can tell you is what I expect from our side. We're going to stay focused on First Amendment protection, but we're also going to make sure that we protect everyone in this city.
So Chicago police again turning out here. And just a reminder, Chicago PD has 17 other law enforcement agencies from across Illinois and from Wisconsin here in town, helping them with the DNC, along with, the governor says, the National Guard. But those other agencies, the city says, are guarding facilities, they're guarding buildings and sites. Yeah. CPD is the only agency out here. City officers are out here dealing with the protests and getting ready for another night. Hallie.
Maggie Vespa live for us there outside here in Chicago. Maggie, thank you. Coming up, we're getting into what the so-called Harris coalition could look like and how that might look different from the coalition's President Biden or former President Obama built. We got a lot more to get to coming up, including some guests you won't want to miss. Right here as our special coverage continues. We are back here just about an hour hour or so away from things kicking off for night 2 of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. And tonight, campaign officials say we can expect to see this broad, diverse, and deep coalition of support behind this pretty brand new Democratic ticket, with a whole bunch of new speakers being added every single day. The idea here, right, is the idea that Democrats and maybe even some Republicans would come together to back VP Harris. Let me bring in Democratic strategist Amisha Cross and MSNBC anchor Simone Sanders-Townsend. Good to see both of you. Amisha, let me start with you, and I want to show folks who's speaking tonight. You've got, obviously, we've been talking about the Obamas, you've got Doug Emhoff, but also Governor J.B. Pritzker, somebody who's on the short list for that potential running mate slot. You've got Senator Tammy Duckworth, Senator Bernie Sanders, who represents more of that progressive wing of the party, Senator Chuck Schumer, that more traditional wing. You've been seeing some overtures to independents as well. I'm thinking of Governor Andy Beshear last night in his speech, reaching out to people who aren't just firmly in the Democratic furniture, if you will. How do you see this coalition coming together?
I think it's coming together splendidly, because what Kamala Harris is doing is expanding that tent. She wants to make sure that the tried and true Democrats knows that she's here for them, but she also wants to expand to people who may not have been looking at the Democratic ticket before. Individuals who have either been, voters who were inconsistent in their voting patterns, those who have historically voted Republican, those who are able to be persuaded. But she's also looking at demographics that are generally seen as non-Democratic voters. She is expanding that tent, and she's expanding the map at the same time. And I think it's very important because it showcases that the South is in play. It showcases that individuals who might not always look at something like NBC News now are also those voters that we want to reach. And I think that it's extremely smart, especially right now when so many people are turned off by the rhetoric, that are turned off by the insanity of what a Trump administration was, but are also, tired of hearing back and forth this war-type mantra. They want someone who is going to be able to do the job on day one. They want someone who's going to be a unifier. They want someone who brings joy to the ticket. They're also looking towards what those policies could be and what could help people who are in the middle class be able to stay there, as well as those who aspire to be there, be able to jump in.
You talk about putting different groups, putting different locations in play. What about, Simone, this idea of maybe putting some Republicans in play as well? That clearly seems to be at least part of the hope with this convention when you look at the programming. I'm super interested to see somebody who I interacted with a lot when I covered the Trump White House, and that is Stephanie Grisham, who was like an OG Donald Trump person, right? Mm-hmm. Back in his first campaign for presidency. She is now set to speak tonight here on this stage in Chicago to make the case against former President Trump and to make the case for Kamala Harris. It's not just her. You've also got Jeff Duncan. You've also got Adam Kinzinger and others, Olivia Troy, some of these folks who are set to sort of make the case. How effective do you think that could be?
Let me first just say, Hallie, that I was shocked by the Stephanie Grisham being on the stage. Because while she is first of all, because when she served as the White House press secretary, she held not one White House press briefing and took not one White House press person question. And so and then Stephanie Grisham had a lot to say after she left office in a book that she wrote. No shade about people writing books. I myself am an author, but I think the juxtaposition of a Stephanie Grisham vis-a-vis someone like Olivia Troy, who served as an advisor on the Homeland Security beat, if you will, to former Vice President Mike Pence. Olivia Troy, who is someone who is a tried and true Republican herself, and stood lock and step with Mike Pence when he decided to go against what Donald Trump and so many of the other Republicans in the Republican Party apparatus wanted him to do in terms of doing his job, and he certified the election results on January 6th, not what Donald Trump wanted him to do. So I think the Stephanie Grisham choice is an interesting one, and I'm wondering what she is going to say, because there are other Republican women who did serve in the Trump administration, like a Sarah Matthews, right? Like I'm blanking on her name.
Alyssa Farrah Griffin,
Alyssa Farrah Griffin, right? Even the young woman who spoke up and testified before the January 6th committee.
Cassidy Hutchinson.
So I'll say that's my piece of criticism, if you will, tonight for the Republican slate. But then you have folks like Mayor John Giles, who is the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, but also importantly, he is co-chair of the Immigration Task Force for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The immigration piece, border security, but also immigration writ large, is a very important piece of this election. And Democrats have leaned in on this. The vice president herself has a deep history with this particular issue. And I think John Giles is someone that can be an effective surrogate to tried and true Republicans who just want want government to work for them. So I do think that is the play here for this, and I'm looking forward to see what unfolds on that stage tonight.
Amisha, there's also this idea, right, of having sort of casting an eye on history. You heard former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton do that in her remarks last night, talking about how that, Kamala Harris was waving on the other side of that glass ceiling if she were to win the White House here. How much are you hearing about that as you're working the floor, as you're walking around from people, the idea that the historic nature of the Harris candidacy could be in play?
Oh, a lot. I don't think that anybody who's watched this election cycle is not moved by the fact that this could be, it is a very historic election, but beyond that, this is a woman of color, a black woman who is running. This is a black woman who's been able to galvanize support as well as expand, I think, the Democratic base, expand what that 10 actually looks like, but she's also running against the backwinds of anti-CRT, of anti-DEI, of anti-civil rights legislation. We know what that is. We've seen it take off in the states, and we've also seen what Project 2025 looks like. With that being said, you cannot remove what this historical election is going to be, not only for women, particularly women of color, but also for black women, because I think that there is a huge play here. We know how the Democratic Party has relied on the black vote, particularly led by black females when we talk about the organizing potential, but also how they carried Joe Biden during his process 4 years ago. But now, when we see the galvanizing of the Divine Nine, when we see all the fundraising and organizing calls, when we see what's happening in communities across the country, I think that that's going to be something that really sets the standard. And anyone on this floor, you cannot talk to them about Kamala Harris without them bringing up history.
That brings us, Simone, to the gender gap that exists currently right now in this presidential race. It is double digits, 20-plus points. If you look at where the numbers are, men for former President Trump versus women, of course, for Vice President Harris. What does she need to do to build on that?
Look, I think that the vice president is going, and you're seeing it happen this week, right? An introduction of her bio, whom she is, from people that actually know her. President Obama and Mrs. Obama on the stage tonight are going to be an important part of that, as are people like Angela Alsobrooks, the county executive that is running for Senate in Maryland. So that's going to be an important piece, but also the policies. I think voters still, as I've been out there talking to people, they say since the switch happened, because that's how they're referring to it, Hallie, the switch at the top of the ticket, they want to know more about Vice President Harris as a person, but also the kind of president she would be. So it's more on those policies, and what Democrats are going to put front and center is going to be critical, I think, to closing the gaps a little bit. But I would also just caution, I think that we are seeing in the polling some of what we saw in 2016. There might be people who are unwilling to say that they are, in fact, going to vote for Donald Trump. I don't think this is going to be a blowout. I think this is going to be a very close race in many states across the country. And in talking with the Harris campaign folks and people close to the vice president, she believes that as well.
Simone Sanders Townsend, great to see you. Amisha Cross, thanks to you for being here as well. Both of you, a lot of gratitude. So listen, we've talked Democrats, we've talked Republicans. Coming up, we're talking about the third party factor here and some very interesting news today. The stark admission from RFK Jr.'s running mate about their campaign and what they may do next. We're going to talk about how Democrats are looking to keep spoilers at bay and whether you could end up seeing Secretary Kennedy in a Trump administration, ? That's next. We are back with our live coverage here of night 2 of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. Taking a look here at the floor behind me, it is filling up. We expect things to kick off formally in just about 45 minutes from now. Jacob Soboroff is down there on the floor. And Jacob, I know we're going to be hanging with you for the next little bit here. Interestingly, it's all about, right, when you're on the floor, when you're backstage, etc., who you see. And one of our colleagues, Monica Alba, has just spotted somebody pretty interesting who is here at the Democratic National Convention, and that is Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former confidant, of course, who has turned somebody who has testified against him. We've been talking about the idea of some of these sort of former Trump allies. I'm thinking Stephanie Grisham, etc., Republicans coming and speaking to try to make the case for Kamala Harris. So Michael Cohen seems to be part and parcel of that strategy, if you will.
It's so interesting, Hallie. I do think that tonight in particular you're going to see, and we saw a little bit of it last night in those videos of former Republicans. In fact, some folks who were former, I think, self-described hardcore MAGA Republicans coming out to be a part of this. And with many of them, we're hearing about democracy. Obviously, with Michael Cohen, we're hearing very firsthand accounts, and Stephanie Grisham as well, about the inner workings with Cohen of the Trump Organization, Stephanie Grisham, the inner workings of the Trump White House. She obviously was very close. You know this better than anybody. to the former First Lady as well. But, you know, I think that tonight, obviously, that's going to be one of the themes. As the night goes on, it'll move away from that, of course, and I think there's a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
It's much busier down here today than it was at this time yesterday, with the Obamas participating in the events tonight. A lot of people are talking about the fact that former President Obama and Michelle Obama will be down here on the floor. And I just in terms of pure buzz level, you could kind of feel the energy cranked up a notch from just last night.
Jacob Soboroff live there on the floor here at the United Center. Soba, thank you much. Appreciate it. We got a lot more to get to when we come back, including, of course, a look at what is next for nights 3 and 4 here at the DNC. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. Do not adjust your televisions or your internet, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jacob Soboroff on the floor of the Democratic National Convention, night 2, about to get underway. Here while Hallie Jackson takes a quick break. She'll be back in just a moment. But tonight's a big night, as we've been talking about all night on NBC News Now. We're going to see former President Obama and Michelle Obama grace the stage here in Chicago. There is a lot of excitement, and it has been building progressively, no pun intended, over the course of the last couple hours here on the floor of the United Center in Chicago. Take a look at that speakers lineup. Michelle Obama, President Obama, Chuck Schumer, the governor of Illinois, Tammy Duckworth will be here. Bernie Sanders will be on the floor. But a lot of folks are still talking about what happened last night here in Chicago. Governor Walz and Vice President Harris were both here in person last night. We saw the Vice President grace the stage just briefly for a minute before President Biden gave that speech that I think was not only a reflection on his legacy, but also a look towards the future and the passing of the torch, if you will. I had a chance personally to catch up with Governor Walz right up there, as a matter of fact, in his personal box. Just as President Biden was getting ready to speak, here's what he told me last night. Take a look. How you feeling, sir?
We're excited. It's a pretty important night for Democrats tonight to honor Joe Biden, and I think Wynn and I, the kids, are excited to be here.
Could you ever imagine a night like this, to be here and to be with the second gentleman, to be with your wife, and to be potentially on the verge of becoming the next Vice President of the United States?
I don't know, doesn't every public school teacher imagine being here? No, it's a privilege, it's an honor, and I can tell you this ticket, feeling that energy, just a privilege.
You can see in that video that we just played for you when I was speaking with Governor Walz, say next to him was Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman of the United States, potential first gentleman of the United States. He will be gracing the stage tonight. Let's go for a little walk, guys. This is Illinois. This is the home state delegation here in the United States. How's everybody feeling from Illinois? Oh, you're passing out pins. Wait a minute. Is this a pin transaction in progress?
Yes.
Okay, what's your name?
Rosalind.
Rosalind, and you're from Alaska?
I'm from Alaska, yes, sir.
What part?
Anchorage.
Anchorage, Alaska. So you're from up there?
Yes, I am.
How is it to be in Chicago?
It feels so good. I'm so excited. The weather's nice. This is my first Democratic National Convention, so yeah. Totally stoked.
Vice President Harris could be the next President of the United States. This is your first convention. How does it feel for you to be here, sort of on the verge of a potentially historic transition in American politics?
It's historic. So I'm ecstatic. Yesterday's day one was off the chain. Like, that was unbelievable seeing her come out. I was dancing to Beyonce, and before I knew it,
there she was.
Vice President Kamala was on the stage, and I was like, oh my gosh. So now every time Beyonce's on, I'm going to think she's going to be on stage.
All right, so we will be on Beyonce alert. Can I see the pin that you're handing out?
So this is our state flag.
So this is, here's the Alaska flag, guys. Pardon my manicure.
I got some really cute ones. This is our...
So you're trading pins?
Yes.
Which one is this here?
That's our Mhof and our Alaska Dems.
Oh, this is nice.
Yes.
With the pride flag?
Yes, sir.
And so you guys are giving out pins to, you're in the Illinois delegate.
Yes, I am.
Hey, can I say hello to her?
Yes.
Okay, it's really nice to meet you.
It was nice to meet you guys too.
What's your name?
I'm Kathy Morales.
And so, is this your first convention?
Yes, it is.
How does it feel for you to be here?
Very exciting. I'm excited to be part of everything happening, such a historic convention.
What brings you here? Why'd you decide to come?
Well, I am a civics teacher, so this is something very important to me.
No kidding. God bless you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
What do you teach? What age kids?
I teach high school, juniors, and seniors.
What are you teaching them about this election and what's happening, what's taking place, and most importantly, what's at stake?
Well, I'm teaching them a lot about different topics and how
I'm going to teach them how I ended up here, how elections are working, and how important it is to be an active citizen in their government.
That's really cool. You said Catherine, right?
Kathia.
Kathy?
Kathia.
Kathia. Excuse me, Kathia. Nice. I got double earplugs in. I can't even hear myself talking. Nice to meet you, Kathia. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a great time. Guys, come with me. So, you know, we give a lot of love to the delegations on the floor, and at the Republican convention, you may or may not know this, every delegation was actually on the floor of the Fiserv Arena in Milwaukee. Here, it's a little bit different. Up here are some of the other delegations in the stands, and what we haven't been able to do really is give a lot of love to the people up top. The way that it works is the campaigns will situate different delegations in different areas based on, I don't think they would say this, but the priority with which they want to put those delegations because of the importance they think they are in the election. Here's the seating chart. So if you look at the seating chart, down in front is California, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Tennessee and Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Maryland, Nebraska. Of course, Nebraska is a very important swing, not just a swing state, but a swing district in that 2nd congressional district. If it's a 269 electoral college tie, that 2nd district, because they apportion their electoral votes by congressional district, could break the tie and ultimately put one candidate or the other over the top. Up here, it's the states that maybe they don't think are as important. Let's go take a look. Come with me. By the way, they're all important to me. Hi, how are you? What's your name?
Sanji.
You having a good time?
I'm having an incredible time.
You have Massachusetts delegation?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Nice to see you guys. Thank you very much. Massachusetts in the bag for the Democrats, I think it's fair to say, or at least that's what the Democrats would say. That's why you guys might be a little further back. Fair enough?
Yeah, but not in the bag. More like we know who should be president.
Right. Yeah, look, we send more activists all around the country than any other state in the union.
Is that true?
Yeah, we export 2 great things in Massachusetts, cranberries and political activists. So we're in every swing state all across the country.
I'm going to go get some cranberries. You didn't bring me any. Thank you very much. Oh, very nice. Look at that. Mass Dems for Kamala. Mass Dems for Kamala. Guys, nice to meet you. Oh, so sorry. Okay, let's take a walk. Chris Jackson's doing a great job here of following me up the stairs. How are you guys? We got the Ohio delegations up here. Ohio, obviously, is a mega swing state. Hi, how are you? Come on, let's talk. What's your name?
Cindy Dempsey.
Cindy, it's so nice to see you. I don't want to squish your fingers here. I was saying that the people up here are in states that maybe the campaigns don't think are as important. But let me tell you something. That is wrong about Ohio. I stand corrected, guys. Fact check live on NBC News Now.
Let me tell you why it's wrong. Because in last November, Ohio passed, much to the country's surprise, by 57% an abortion initiative. So abortion rights are now codified in our Constitution. So don't count us out. And we have Sherrod Brown, our fabulous senator, on the ballot, which we will send back to the Senate. But more importantly, J.D. Vance is not beloved at all. No one cares about him. He's barely in the state. So watch us.
Let me ask you, you mentioned reproductive rights. Is that the driving issue for you? Is that what brings you here? Is that what is sort of motivating you at this point in the election?
Not just me. It's all the millions of other women in Ohio. Whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican or independent, people believe that government don't belong in your doctor's office. It's a choice between the woman, her physician, and the people you love. And so that is a driving point. Also, the Biden-Harris administration has done so much for Ohio with the CHIPS and the Infrastructure Act. We have all these new plants, electric cars and chips. And
you got to be the White House press secretary.
So I am telling you, don't write us off. I don't care what anybody says. And you can watch us, and you will be surprised by the margin.
I'll bet you nickel that my bosses are going to send me to Ohio after this conversation. Yeah, I got about 20 seconds to go.
So the Supreme Court, we have the opportunity to flip the Supreme Court from a Republican to a Democratic majority. Watch that happen, because we have a gerrymandering issue on the ballot, and that's going to drive people out.
It's a hot tip there from Ohio. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much. I wanted to go to the back. I wanted to go up here and just real quick before we go, I'm so sorry, give a little love to the people in the way, way back. Here's Alabama. How you doing, Alabama? Everybody feeling all right?
We're New Hampshire.
Say again?
We're New Hampshire.
Oh, all right. Well, God bless New Hampshire. Live free or die. She's Alabama. Hold on. Just give you a little love. How's it feel to be up here doing Alabama?
It feels incredible. I love to represent my state when I can.
What's your name?
April.
April, it's really nice to meet you. Thanks very much. All right, so listen, that's what's going on up here in the United Center. Stick around. There's a lot more to come on NBC. There's a lot more to come on NBC News Now, but for now, I head it over to my friend, my colleague, Chuck Todd. Chuck?
Thank you, Jacob. You know, I don't hate the Ohio as a sneaky battleground state if.
Right.
I wouldn't be shocked if they try to find another state to put in play. It's a long shot, but it isn't that long ago that Ohio was a swing state. So, you know, you'll be headed for a bus trip there soon,
like
I promise.
Working on behalf of the campaign, it might very well go back and play right away.
Look, at a minimum, it might get you to a few Bengals games to see Joe Burrow. Mr. Soboroff, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
Top of the hour, I'm Chuck Todd. I'm helping out while Hallie still finishes up her quick break. We are coming to you live from the United Center here in Chicago. It's night 2 of the Democratic National Convention. It is set to kick off in about 30 minutes. They wanted to up the time here a little bit so they didn't run over the way it happened last night. And if the phrase du jour last night was pass the torch, tonight it is turn the page. In some ways, this is the first night of the Kamala Harris convention. Last night was the goodbye to Joe Biden. You see the stage behind me? That's where you'll see later tonight some of the party's biggest stars of the last decade. Former President Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama. They'll be preceded by the man hoping to become the first gentleman. Frankly, it's the speech I'm most intrigued about. I don't know what it's going to be. It's Doug Emhoff. Very much looking forward to that. And for the Democrats, a bit of a split screen tonight because the two people that this entire event is being built around they're going to be holding a separate rally of their own right next door, about 90 minutes away in the swing state of Wisconsin up there in Milwaukee. Call it the not quite counter programming because the folks in here, they're going to end up seeing a little bit of Kamala Harris's event in Milwaukee, but it is because they're going to try to do it as complimentary programming. But from the Democrats' political opponents, no compliments, plenty of countering. Former President Trump and his running mate both have been in a battleground state blitz this week, and tonight they'll be in Wisconsin and Michigan. All of it, as back here in Chicago, we're watching another protest set to start later tonight, but the protests have really been much more organized and less influential than I think Democrats had feared here. There's a big team, as you know, with us covering every angle. My friend and pal, Kristen Welker, is standing right next to me here in the booth, actually sitting next to me. But we're going to start with my longtime friend, Kelly O'Donnell. And Kelly, we've been talking about this all night. You and I were talking earlier that in some ways, this is the first night of the rest of the Democratic Party's convention.
Absolutely. This is the chance to try to give an introduction to Kamala Harris. And if that sounds a little funny because she has been the sitting vice president, think of it in terms of those people who know her with that title but don't know her whole story. And Barack Obama and Michelle Obama have been friends of Harris, and that's not a storyline that is all that well known publicly. And so they will come in some ways as character witnesses to talk about the leadership qualities and the experience that they will argue to voters is what this particular moment needs. And in the time since Joe Biden has left the race, Barack Obama has emerged as a private advisor to Kamala Harris in things like choosing her running mate in Tim Walz and bringing some of his political allies and staff members into the fold to try to support her. And tapping into the popularity of the Obamas, especially in the city of Chicago that they had called home for so long. This is a chance for people to reconnect to that part of the party and one of the biggest moments in terms of history making with the first African-American president and connecting that line to Kamala Harris, who could become the first woman president. So there will be nostalgia, but there will be a purpose for that to try to make the case for Harris as the candidate of now. Chuck?
And Kelly, I want to get to, like I said, I am very intrigued to hear Doug Emhoff speak. I've not heard him give a long speech. I think a lot of the country, they may know who he is, but they don't know much about him. I know you've got a clip you've obtained. We've got a little bit, I think we can play a little bit of it now, of what we should expect. I think this is from a video that begins with a narration of Doug Emhoff's son. Let's throw to the clip.
In 2014, Kamala became Mamala. She took over Sunday night dinners and taught Doug how to actually cook. Our blended family wasn't used to politics or the spotlight, but when Kamala became senator, we were all excited to step up, especially my dad.
The blended family. For many people, it may look like an episode of Modern Family, right, Kelly?
It's so intentional because that is a way to connect the sitting vice president to many families across America, a blended family where they are working together and the co-parenting that's been a part of our history. And Sunday night dinners, Kamala Harris loves to cook. How many presidents can we say that about if she were to be elected? And so this is a way to humanize her, give some personal details. There's some new photos. These films that are a part of the prime time are big secrets. And so we were fortunate to obtain a short clip to give us a taste of it. And Cole Emhoff, Doug Emhoff's son, who sounds just like his dad, I think, will be introducing him tonight. And then, of course, we will hear from Doug Emhoff, who can talk about Kamala Harris as his life partner and the person that he thinks can be the president. So that will be an emotional time and one where the campaign believes they are using that to make that introduction to someone already well known, but maybe not known in that way. Chuck?
I have to say, Kamala Harris as foodie, I mean, people love being foodies. I think that's a very much something you can connect with that isn't political at all. It'll be interesting to watch Kelly O'Donnell with that. Kelly, thank you. Of course, the woman of the hour, the vice president, Kamala Harris, is actually not in Chicago at the DNC right now, but she's on her way to Milwaukee. Going to have a campaign rally with her running mate, Tim Walz. Still unclear if they're going to make it back in time for her to watch in person her husband's speech tonight, as well as the Obamas. But let's get to Yasser AlCindor, who's in Milwaukee with the vice president, making that 90-minute drive up there. And Yamish, first of all, what do we know about this rally, and how much are the folks here in Chicago going to see of it?
Well, from my understanding, that this rally is going to be really her going back on the campaign trail to underscore that she wants to interact directly with voters. She wants to underscore that her campaign, she says, is one that's people-powered and focused on making lives of the middle class better. But it also is, of course, focused on the critical battleground states. They believe that this is going to be a close race. So while they don't see this as counter-programming, is what the Harris campaign sources have been telling me, they are recognizing that this is happening during the DNC. There's possibly maybe some video that's going to be played during the DNC. But I also want to just underscore just how close this race is, because it tells you why they're stepping away to Chicago to go an hour and a half north. So if we put up some polling for folks, you show that battleground polling of likely voters. Harris is 50% of battleground voters are supporting her in Michigan. 46% are supporting Trump. You look at Pennsylvania, 50% for Harris, 46% for Trump. Same thing in Wisconsin, 50%, 46%. And they're all within the margin of error, but it tells you that this is a close race, and they believe that spending time in Milwaukee, even during the DNC, exactly when people are going to be on stage speaking, that's a worthy use of their time. I also asked them, like, why not have this at 4 p.m. or somewhere earlier so that you could still get back to the DNC? Right. I was told that the Harris campaign really wanted to let people go eat dinner, get off work, and then come and party with them. So there are also going to be some video of the DNC that people can watch here. So it's going to be both sides are going to be able to watch each other here. Chuck?
Yamish, we should point out this is happening in the same arena that Donald Trump just got his nomination some 3 weeks ago. Obviously, pretty intentional, and there's no doubt Mr. Crowd Size might be curious to see what kind of crowd she gets.
I'm very interested to see what the crowd is. Right now, there aren't, the arena isn't filled right now, but I keep looking around because in Atlanta, there were like 14,000, 15,000 people, and her rallies have been packed. They've been joyful. They've been people, long lines all down blocks. I saw a lot of people waiting outside, so it'll be very interesting to see if they can fill this arena, because as you said, it was intentional to come to the exact same arena that Donald Trump and Republicans held the RNC. A little bit of a trolling going on. And this campaign has sort of taken that stance to say, you know, if Donald Trump wants to personally attack the vice president, she's going to go and take it to him. She's going to join Truth Social. She's going to go to the places where he was. So it's very interesting to see them take this step, especially in this space. Chuck?
It is, Yamish. It is a move that you might expect from Donald Trump. But my substitute teacher duties are over here.
Nice.
I got Kristen Welker here and Hallie Jackson. And, you know, Hallie, you can take the man out of the anchor booth. You can't take the anchor out of the
Any day, man. Let me tell you. We love to see it.
The baton back to you.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of torch passing.
I was going to say,
the Democratic National Convention.
It's fun to carry a torch and pass it around. And, yeah, we all have the Olympic spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been cool to see you two on the floor, Chuck. I know you've had a chance to get down there to talk to folks, to talk to delegates. What stood out to you?
It's more fun to talk to the delegates because they care so much about it. Right? Like I always say, the reason I do love politics is because it's how personal it is, how human it is, and sometimes we actually dehumanize it too much. You know, we sometimes are clinical about it, and the way the two campaigns treat each other. but this is a celebration of democracy, just like the one in Milwaukee was, and this one is. So that's where I sort of get my inner sort of Pollyannish geek on, if you will, my patriotic geek on, because everybody here and everybody in the they love America.
Yeah.
They disagree on which direction we should go, but they love this place.
The other thing is they love politics, right?
Yes.
And that is something that they have in common with, I know, the two people that are sitting to the right-hand side of me here, including Kristen Welker. And we've been talking a little bit about some of the big moments tonight. And I know that you and Yamiche have had that conversation as well. What to expect from not just the Obamas, but from Doug Emhoff. Chuck, you mentioned earlier, that's the one you're sort of most intrigued by, because he is such an unknown quantity to a lot of Americans.
Right. We've seen Obamas give speeches, no offense, and I think we know how they'll do. You know, I think about these important first conventions, right? Bill Clinton, in 1992, Bill Clinton, they were trying to connect Clinton to the story of the history of the Democratic Party, and they found this footage of a teenager, Bill Clinton, shaking hands with John Kennedy.
Yeah.
And it was this moment, and the convention didn't know it was coming. Yeah. And the convention just like, so I find these personal spousal moments about who they are, how they grew up. There's things we end up learning we have no idea about. And that's why I think the Emhoff speech tonight should be more important than the Obama speech, because it's going to be setting up the tone for how Democrats personally connect to this potential first night.
And really humanizing, I think, in a lot of ways, too.
Well, in terms of the video clip that we just saw, I mean, it is being narrated by Doug Emhoff's son, and he tells the story of how the vice president became Kamala. And that has a lot of significance right now, not only because it's helping to fill out the biography of who Vice President Kamala Harris is, but because there has been some controversy on the Republican side with the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, making controversial comments about children, women who don't necessarily have children. That's something that, of course, the vice president, second gentleman, his former wife came out and released a statement about
his ex, who's been here at the DNC, by the way.
Yes, and saying that she has been a part of the process of raising these kids, that term Mamala means so much. And so I think that they are trying to fill in those gaps about who she is, about how she will lead, and really trying to paint her as someone who is a part of this blended family, which so many Americans all across this country.
And then, of course, there is the Obama speech, for the reasons that Chuck lays out, will be also interesting. What are you looking for from that? It was interesting talking to Tommy Viator, who knows the Obamas well, about expectations for tonight and the way that the former president may make the case, not just for Kamala Harris, but against former President Trump.
That's right. I mean, he's going to argue that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment for the Democrats. I've been talking to folks who are in touch with him, familiar with his speech tonight, and they say, yes, he's going to make the case for why Kamala Harris, why Tim Walz is the right ticket for right now. He is also, I am told, going to be quite forceful in his case against former President Trump. He is someone, as Jensaki said to you earlier today, who has done that for a long time in a range of different ways. He can be quite serious about the fact that he perceives Trump to be a threat to the democracy, and then he can also, there are moments when he pokes fun at Trump. So we'll listen to see what his tone is tonight. I think it'll be very interesting. But he's going to also talk about Kamala Harris in very personal terms. He's going to talk about the fact that they've known each other for 20 years, why he's impressed by her as the, Attorney General, why she's this barrier breaker. And Attorney General of California, I should say, and why she has been a barrier breaker. And so he can talk about her historic candidacy, I think, in a way that maybe she can't.
I'm going to ask when he campaigned for her. When she was running for Attorney General, got in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, well, that's right. The reference to her look. Her look. Chuck, Kristen, thank you both. We're going to be talking much more throughout the night. Speaking of former President Trump, I want to get to somebody who is covering him and his campaign, because he's been on this counter-programming blitz, if you will. Both the former president and his running mate, J.D. Vance. Today, you've got Mr. Trump in Michigan to talk about crime and safety. You see it on the map here. Senator Vance is next door in Wisconsin, focusing on crime as well. Let me get to Garrett. And there's a couple of new pieces of information here, Garrett, including this new interview that former President Trump has done. He's talking a lot about a whole variety of things. Elon Musk, Robert Kennedy Jr., third-party runs, Kamala Harris, etc. How do you see the strategy taking shape for Team Trump right now during this week when Democrats are looking here behind me to capture a ton of momentum?
Yeah, look, they're trying to do two things at once, Hallie. They're trying to hold events that keep him focused on very specific issues. Today it was crime and public safety. Yesterday it was the economy. But they're also offering him up for interviews with outlets, trying to make sure that he gets some coverage at all at a time where so much of the media is heavily focused on what's going on with Kamala Harris in Chicago. And what you get from that is kind of a tale of two campaign messages. The official message that gets pushed out during the day, and then whatever comes out of these interviews that where Trump is asked about a wide variety of topics in the evening. The Elon Musk one is a perfect example. This was an interview he conducted yesterday with Reuters after this economy-focused event, which the interviewer basically floated a question to him of, would you consider putting Elon Musk in your cabinet or in some role? And Trump, as he's often likes to do, just says, yeah, sure, he's a smart guy. You know, if he'd do it, we'd find a spot for him. And from there, 1,000 ships were launched, none of them about the economy. And so I think this is part of the challenge for Trump in general, given kind of his lack of discipline on the campaign trail, but in this moment with the convention going on, trying to break through specifically.
Garrett, let's look ahead to what else is in store for the former president this week. He's heading to North Carolina tomorrow, which is notable because North Carolina is sort of a fascinating state at the moment when you look at where the race is, but also notable because it will be his first outdoor campaign event since that assassination attempt against him in Butler, Pennsylvania. Not a rally, we understand, but still notable.
Yeah, that's right. So this event will be like one of these smaller messaging events like we've seen earlier this week in Asheboro, North Carolina, focused on national security, the military. But he will be appearing outside and for the first time anywhere other than one of his clubs. Of course, he did that news conference at Bedminster Outdoors last week. We expect to get a look at what this plussed up U.S. Secret Service presence will be for him at that event, possibly including the bullet-resistant glass that we often see when he does when he did outdoor events as president, like the rally on the Ellipse on January 6th, or what we sometimes see with President Biden when he's out for larger scale events. So it'll be a notable moment in the campaign here, and something tells me we're likely to hear Trump himself address it. I cannot imagine he'll simply ignore it since he's so focused on the optics and the logistics around his events, just as someone who pays attention to that, I think, because of his TV background.
I have to say, we have right now, Garrett and you, one of our Donald Trump campaign reporters. Sitting next to me is one of our third-party campaign reporters. And tonight there's kind of a collision between the both of you because former President Trump is talking about something on CNN specifically related to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'd like to ask both of you to stand by for a second. We just cut the clip. We just turned it around. I want to play it here.
Have you considered him for a role in the administration, and what role would that be?
Well, we haven't, but I would love that endorsement because I've always liked him.
Would you also consider putting him in the administration?
You're asking me a very unusual question. I haven't been asked that question yet. I like him a lot. I respect him a lot. I probably would if something like that would happen.
Explain, Alex Seitzwald, who's joining us now here on set, why this is even coming up as a possibility. RFK Jr.'s running mate basically floated this today and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if the goods are good enough, right, if there's a deal that's good enough, RFK Jr. might consider dropping out and backing Mr. Trump.
Yeah, these are some truly remarkable comments from Nicole Shanahan on this podcast, where she basically acknowledged that they have no real path to victory at this point. She spoke in past tense about the campaign, said they do not want to help Kamala Harris get elected in any way, and they would work with Donald Trump, which is, of course, what Democrats have been accusing Kennedy of doing this entire time, and they've adamantly denied. But now that the campaign is kind of coming to the end of the road, they're looking at some kind of offer. And I spoke to some Kennedy supporters this afternoon about those comments, and one that really stood out to me was this guy, Kyle Kemper, who's been driving across the country in a bus that he made himself with Kennedy's face on the side, and he was furious at the idea of Kennedy working with Trump. He said it would be a deal with the devil. He shouldn't be trusted, and that it would betray the whole ethos of the campaign, which is about independence and breaking the two-party system.
Garrett, we heard former President Trump in that interview suggest that he would love RFK Jr.'s endorsement. Probably more newsy if he said he didn't want the endorsement. Of course he would, right?
I think, Hallie, but I've been playing this out in my head all day today, and I actually think I could make the argument that Kennedy's more useful in the race to Donald Trump as a third-party candidate, as a vote sink for people who don't like Kamala Harris and don't particularly like him than he is as just another endorser. As Alex was just pointing out, I'm not convinced that Kennedy's endorsement brings all that many of Kennedy's voters to Trump. The idea that he can be out there for people who, you know, the double haters in the previous consideration of this race when Joe Biden was still in it, but I think it still exists. People who just burned out on the two-party system. You know, if that lowers Kamala Harris's vote totals in any number of places by some significant measure, isn't that more useful than another endorsement from someone who can be used against you just as well as he can be used for you?
Garrett Haake, thank you very much. Alex, on this whole issue, it came up because of somebody we haven't seen a ton of on the campaign trail, and that's Nicole Shanahan, RFK Jr.'s running mate.
Yeah, she has been basically absent since she was announced on very few events. I mean, the whole campaign has gone kind of dark in a while. And I think this podcast interview was an explanation of why we have not seen a lot about her, because she said a lot of things that I don't think the campaign would have liked her to divulge. And basically saying the campaign is over, that she said the Democrats made us a spoiler. Clearly very, very upset, very resentful of the Democratic Party, which she was a member of for years. Said her biggest regret in life was supporting Chuck Schumer and giving him money to help the Democratic Senate turn. So she is out for revenge. She talked about maybe running for governor of California and floated this deal with Trump, which has been kind of, you know, on the margins for a while. But it's clear that she's done with the Democratic Party. I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is pretty much done with the Democratic Party. So they might be like a Tulsi Gabbard kind of figure and have gone full to the right in Trump's camp.
What do the numbers show, and is he even on enough ballots in enough states to make a difference here?
He is on enough ballots theoretically to make a difference, and that was her word when can you win? She said theoretically we could win, but you know the polls show that he's still pulling about 5 to 10% depending on the polls, and some of those voters would definitely go to Donald Trump. I spoke to some of them today. I even spoke to a lifelong Democrat who said that she would consider voting for Donald Trump, which is something that she would never consider if Kennedy asked her to. But then I also talked to a lot of his other voters, like Garrett was saying, who said they will never vote for a major party candidate at all. And it's not clear to me that even if Kennedy asked them to, that they would do it.
Alex Seitz-Wald, good to have you on this, a topic that has made getting a lot of buzz today, given some of those new remarks. Appreciate it, friend. Good to see you. Should note, too, by the way, on the floor behind us here, the delegates have just been told to take their seats. I'm turning around to get a good look. You know, I don't know if it's 100% compliance or even anywhere close to that, but we are getting ready for the programming to begin here on night 2 of the Democratic National Convention. We are going to bring you that start live when we come back. Stay with us with our rolling special coverage right here on NBC News Now. You are looking live here at the floor of the Democratic National Convention. Night 2 about to begin any minute. The delegates have been asked to take their seats. That's because the program will begin shortly with a number of big names, a number of critical speeches coming up on night 2 here in Chicago. That's what's happening inside the United Center. But outside, you've got the Chicago Police Department. Look at this, bolstering that fencing, that barricading that's along the pre-approved protest route after demonstrators tore down part of it and spilled into the street there overnight, leading to multiple arrests. Tonight's protest, it's going to look a little bit different. It's planned to be in front of the Israeli consulate. The group behind it is called Behind Enemy Lines, operating under the slogan, "Make it great like 68." That's a callback, of course, to the 1968 DNC protests against the Vietnam War, which turned into violent riots throughout the city of Chicago. NBC's Maggie Vespa is joining us now with more. Talk about the expectation for tonight, the demonstration, what we think we're going to see, the group behind it, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure, Hallie. Well, kind of to get an idea, you can see the group behind me. Again, Chicago PD already here lining the street in front of the Israeli consulate. You can see how far this line of bike cops goes. And then we have, obviously, the barricade up as well. Suffice to say, after what we saw last night, it sounds like things at least are that more tense heading into tonight, but especially when you look at the group behind this demonstration tonight. You talked about Behind Enemy Lines. This is a group that basically is far more confrontational when it comes to dealing with police and potentially trying to confront police and stir something up. They actually have a slogan tied to tonight's event, which, as you said, is called "Make It Great Like 68." They said, quote, "We're calling on students and youth to be bold and audacious. Take the front lines, and yes, take police beatings and arrests." For what it's worth, Behind Enemy Lines was also part of the threat assessment that the FBI and local authorities put together ahead of the DNC, just kind of letting them know which groups headed to town and which groups gathering in Chicago might be sort of like the highest on their radar. So heading into tonight, we don't know if we're expecting as big of a crowd as we saw yesterday at the protest, which ended and kind of devolved to some protesters tearing down part of the Secret Service perimeter. But again, this group just known to be that much more confrontational, that much more intense. They're expected to gather here in the next couple of hours, Hallie.
Maggie Vespa live for us there on the streets of Chicago. Keep us posted, Maggie. Thank you for being out there. Let's talk now about the state of play as things really kick into high gear with just 75 plus days until Election Day. Sooner than that, when early voting will begin. And right now, what we've seen over the course of the last week or so are polls showing Vice President Harris gaining ground or pulling even with former President Trump in some key battlegrounds, still inside the margin of error, but outperforming how President Biden had been doing against Mr. Trump. And look at this. You can see the gender gap in this particular election getting bigger. You've got Mr. Trump losing ground to VP Harris among women voters across key states by 10, sometimes 20%. Of course, the question is, how significant are these numbers going to be come Election Day? Do you know who's well equipped to talk about the significance of numbers? Steve Kornacki, of course, joining us now from the big board to break it all down. Hey, friend, it's good to see you. We miss you in Chicago, but we're glad you're at your own personal home there next to the charts and graphs that we know you love. Talk us through it.
Yeah, Hallie, this thing wouldn't have been easy to transport to Chicago, so we'll do it from here. Let's talk gender gap here. Let's talk about it nationally and at the state level, because as you're suggesting there, two different things we're seeing right now. National picture right here. Here's what we've got. The 2020 result. This is an average of all of the post-election surveys, understanding the 2020 electorate. Donald Trump, on average, won in 2020 over Joe Biden by 5 points among men. Now, by comparison, during this campaign, when Joe Biden was the Democratic candidate, on average, for the final month before he dropped out, Trump was leading Biden by 12 among men. So again, with a gender gap, Republicans typically do better with men. Trump had been doing better than in 20 against Joe Biden. Now, Kamala Harris comes in, and for the last month, Trump lead on average 7 points among men. So from 12 to 7, still a solid Trump lead, but that's a little bit better for Democrats. Then among women, take a look at this, 13-point Biden win in 2020. Biden had only been ahead by 5 before he dropped out. Now Harris is up by 9. So Harris on average leading women by 9. Trump on average leading men by 7. That adds up to a 16-point gender gap. Now, that's big, that's significant, but nationally, that's not new. That's typically what we see in presidential elections. As you say, here's the thing that's new. It's from one pollster, New York Times Siena, and it's one set of polls, these battleground polls they did last week. But you were pointing some of them there. I mean, Michigan is the biggest. They found Trump by 20 among men, by 28 among women. That is a gender gap of 48 points. Wisconsin, Trump 17 men. Harris, 24 women, 41-point gender gap. Georgia, 20 points, Trump men. Harris, 10 with women, 30-point gender gap. So this is massive if it's true. And that's the question here, because it is one pollster, as we say, one set of polls. There can be statistical noise. I mean, look, in Pennsylvania, they actually didn't find much of a gender gap at all. It indicates how these numbers can bounce around, but it raises the possibility of state-specific effects that might be driving gender gaps in particular states. We need to see more polls, but if that is something we keep seeing in polls, Hallie, it's enormous.
Steve Kornacki back at the big board. Steve, thank you. Let's bring you back here to Chicago, because if you heard the music kick up behind me, that is because night 2 is coming into play. You just saw Jamie Harrison. Let's listen.
The second in-person session of the 49th Quadrennial National Convention of the Democratic Party will now come to order.
Please stand if you are able for this evening's invocation, offered by Rabbi Sharon Browse.
As we wait for Mike Memoli here, he's down on the floor for us, the DNC gaveling in. Let's get down to Mem, and I hate to do this to you, Mike, because I know they're about to, I think, lead the group in prayer, but give us a sense. Are folks in their seats?
We have gathered together. That's right. Well, Hallie, we know what the issue was last night. Things went just a little bit long. So the convention organizers tonight are doing everything they can to not just keep things on a better pace, but also start things earlier just in case they do go long. And that's really important because of what we know about tonight's program, Hallie. Last night was significant, of course, the moment, especially with President Biden. But tonight there are a lot more complicated moving parts. You have the Democratic nominee for president not here in Wisconsin. They want to bring her her rally in Wisconsin to the delegates here as well. That requires some time precision. You also have the roll call that's happening tonight, the ceremonial roll call, where it involves elements both in the room but also some remote pieces where they're going to try and borrow from that hybrid, mostly virtual convention in 2020 and complement it with the in-person experience here in 2024. All of that means that they have to keep things on a much tighter schedule this time around, and so we do see most of the delegations in their seats. Everyone is filtering in. We haven't heard any of the security issues that we saw yesterday as well. So all signs are that things are about to get going here, and it's going to be a very interesting, busy night, of course, headlined by not just one but both Obamas, Barack and Michelle Obama.
So what you're saying, it sounds like, Mem, is that there's a chance folks may be able to get to bed or get to their after parties. Perhaps by midnight, we will see, Eastern time at least. Mem, you talk about the headliners tonight. If we look at the moments that have been emotionally resonant at the Democratic National Convention so far, obviously last night held a lot of emotion. Tonight, there's a lot of focus, rightfully so, on the Obamas, on Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, who remains hugely popular among Democrats. In fact, if you looked at some polling from back in July for hypothetical head-to-head matchups, this is when President Biden was still in the race. She was the only Democratic name polled that actually outperformed former President Trump. She has zero interest, and she's made that clear in getting back into politics. But part of tonight is also going to be about the person hoping to become the first gentleman, and that's Doug Emhoff here, too. We've been talking a little bit about that biographical video that NBC News has exclusively. His son introducing him, talking about how Kamala Harris became Mamala. That may hold, I think, a lot of emotional resonance tonight for people as well as he takes the stage. Do we know if Vice President Harris is going to be watching from Wisconsin?
Oh, you can be sure she is. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Hallie, because I think this is we talk about the historic nature of Kamala Harris's candidacy. We have sort of lost sight of Doug in some ways in all of this. The vice president likes to call her husband the second gentleman. He's the first, obviously, male to hold the role of the second spouse. And he would obviously make history if she makes history as the first woman president. And think about what we saw last night, of course. Secretary Clinton speaking here. She was the first woman nominated by a major party. But, of course, her husband was a former president. And so even as she was campaigning and as she was making history, that we didn't necessarily look at Bill Clinton in the way that we might look at Doug Emhoff. And so a campaign advisor was telling me that they feel he's going to play a really important role in speaking, especially to those voters who are not necessarily politically oriented, who may come from blended families. Like he'll highlight that story here tonight as well.
Mike, Memoli, what's been the most interesting thing you've seen down there on the floor so far today?
Please welcome Joshua.
Well, I think I'm holding it. I'm not what you would call a Swiftie. I haven't really been to too many concerts here, but we're all wondering what these LED wristbands are that are on every one of the chairs here in the arena. There's going to be some sort of multimedia presentation here where this comes into play, and we're looking forward to seeing what it is.
All right, we will see that moment, of course, as we pause for a brief moment for the Pledge of Allegiance there behind you, Mike Memoli. And there it is, 15-year-old Joshua Davis from Virginia kicking off night 2 here at the DNC. We are going to continue our special coverage of the Democratic Convention with our thanks to Mem and others when we get back, including more on the other, of course, spouse set to speak tonight, not just Doug Emhoff, but Michelle Obama back in the spotlight. We're getting into it right after a real quick break. Stay tuned for our special coverage rolling on NBC News Now.
We have lost.
We are back with our continuing special coverage here. Night 2 of the Democratic National Convention starting in just the last 10 minutes, not even. And so far, very much on schedule. We'll see if that continues. Of course, tonight we're looking ahead to 2 very distinct political spouses making the case for Vice President Kamala Harris at the DNC. We are going to hear from the woman you see on screen, former First Lady Michelle Obama. She is one of the most popular voices in the Democratic Party. She's spoken at every DNC since 2008 when her husband was nominated. Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman who could become the first gentleman, will be with us as well. For more, I'm joined by NBC News Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell. And as a roar goes up, Andrea, behind me, I'm just going to turn around. Look at this moment. Patti LaBelle early here on stage. And the crowd is on their feet. So much of this, Andrea, as you know, is about the energy in the room, is about capturing moments like this to get the folks here, the delegates excited. I should note, still a number of empty seats. That'll pick up as the night goes on.
And they've been doing that also with surprise guests, surprise appearances. Kamala Harris last night coming out in a cameo. Then all four of them, the two couples, coming out at the end of President Biden's speech. And we don't know what's going to happen tonight because we know that Kamala Harris and Doug Walsh are in Milwaukee. It's only an hour and a half now, but they can be on screen at any time by satellite.
Well, you know who's not on screen? She's here in person. Let's take a minute. Let's just vibe out here.
Enjoy it.
Listen in. Patti LaBelle at 80 years old, getting the crowd on its feet here at the DNC. Your turn, Andrea. You want to take a solo?
What a voice. I mean,
incredibly powerful. Somebody else, of course, who has a voice in a very different kind of way is Michelle Obama. We're talking about politically, as she is set to take the stage as well. She is somebody that you have covered through the course of your career, Andrea, and somebody who, along with her husband, has stepped out of this role of, let's call them king or queen maker, if you will. They've both got other projects going on. They've got that Netflix deal. Very consciously choosing not to engage in the political arena to the degree that I think some Democrats would like them to. Talk us through that dynamic.
No, that's so true. But, you know, Kamala Harris had to make a choice in 2008 during that very bitter Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama primary campaign, and she chose Barack Obama over Hillary Clinton. And that says a lot, and it's paying benefits right now. The other thing is that Michelle Obama and Joe Biden, frankly, were never terribly close, and that became more estranged after Hunter Biden's divorce because Michelle Obama was known to be very close friends with Catherine Buell, his first wife. So there were tensions there, tensions in the family, but it spilled over into politics. But she's... And, you know, she never loved politics. Yeah. But she's coming on tonight.
About that. I mean, she made that pretty clear.
She said that going in with him in 2008. So she was a reluctant spouse. She's written about it.
Yeah.
But she's the most popular political figure and celebrity and sort of political celebrity context in the country. bar none. Her books sell more than anyone else's within that cadre of presidents and first ladies. And she does those book tours. She's won all kinds of awards for voicing her own books. So she is a unique personality, and her speaking here is a great tribute, because it was not at all clear she was going to do it. Barack Obama was clearly going to do that, but she chooses her roles very carefully.
They're friends, right? I mean, they are people who they've known each other for decades now. They are, by all accounts, quite close on a personal level, not just on that sort of politics level where everybody's your friend.
And, there was that undercurrent of tension that Barack Obama was part of the Democratic leadership group pressuring for Joe Biden to get out.
Andrew, we're going to take a beat for a second here, because Jack Schlossberg is walking out onto the stage, the grandson of former President John F. Kennedy, a Vogue political correspondent who's got a big following online. Let's listen in.
My grandfather, and he's my hero. JFK was the youngest person ever elected president and the first Catholic. He sent a man to the moon, fought for civil rights, and navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis peacefully. Most of all, he inspired a new generation to ask what they could do for our country. Tonight, JFK's call to action is now ours to answer, because once again, the torch has been passed to a new generation, to a leader who shares my grandfather's energy, vision, and optimism for our future. That leader is Vice President Kamala Harris. Like President Kennedy, Vice President Harris has dedicated her life to public service. She believes in America, like my grandfather did, that we do things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. As president, she will fight for working families. She will expand investments in clean energy so that my generation will have clean air and good jobs. She will defend our freedoms, the freedom for women anywhere in America to make their own healthcare choices, the freedom to be safe from gun violence, the freedom to vote easily and without fear. The choice is ours to make, and history is watching to see what we will do. Now, let's elect Kamala Harris the next President of the United States. Thank you.
Jack Schlossberg speaking there briefly, making the case for Kamala Harris and linking her, of course, to his grandfather, former President Kennedy, Andrea.
And just very briefly, when he was still in graduate school, he made his debut on the political stage, if you will, at a White House black-tie dinner honoring the 50th anniversary of his grandfather's establishing the Medal of Freedom 50 years ago at that point. And he was the MC, and it was the first time he'd been out in public. His mother, Caroline, of course, is the ambassador previously to Japan, now to Australia, from President Obama and then President Biden. And he'd never spoken publicly before, and he was just a wow. And that's when he became kind of known. I was there. My husband had been awarded the Medal of Freedom, so that's why I was there.
Andrea,
very exciting.
It's fascinating to look at that arc, at that thread that connects these Democrats, through history. Andrea, thank you. We got a lot more to get to here as night 2 of the Democratic National Convention is in full swing. We're going to get back here in just a second after we sneak in a quick break with more here live from Chicago on NBC News Now. We are back now with more of our continuing coverage live from night 2 of the Democratic National Convention. Look at that. The floor is filling up. People are milling about. They were on their feet for Patti LaBelle, as you watched live just a couple of minutes ago. And this place is going to get pretty raucous coming up in the next couple of hours. You're going to watch it all here on NBC News Now as we await a number of key moments here. Of course, those speeches from former First Lady Michelle Obama, former President Barack Obama, current second gentleman hoping to become the first gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and many others. I want to bring in a couple folks to talk about some of the dynamics at play in the state of the race. Julio Terusa, national political reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Maya King, who covers politics in the Southeast for the New York Times, and Peter Baker, who covers politics everywhere at all times, constantly, as the New York Times chief White House correspondent. Peter, I'll start with you here. because we are seeing this moment where the DNC, the Harris-Walz campaign, is really looking to create a coalition of people in a way that the Trump campaign has made clear in conversations with senior advisors. They want to supercharge their base. They want to boost turnout for the people who already like Donald Trump. You don't see a lot of olive branches from the former president to like Nikki Haley supporters or whatever. His message is take it or leave it. Different message from Democrats here who want to broaden what they see as a Big Tent.
Absolutely. Look, at the Republican convention in Milwaukee a few weeks ago, you didn't have any former presidents. You didn't have any former presidential nominees. The Republican Party of old did not show up at that convention. They weren't welcome.
Because it barely exists.
They barely exist, and they weren't welcome. Here tonight, you're going to see, of course, the past in Barack Obama and Michelle Obama tomorrow, Bill Clinton. We heard Hillary Clinton last night along with Joe Biden. And you have a party that is embracing its past at the same time Kamala Harris is making an argument for the future, right? We don't go back. That's her phrase. It's a way of saying generational argument against Donald Trump, but not at the expense of the party as it existed before.
Maya, we mentioned Nikki Haley, somebody who has, of course, now endorsed former President Trump. She's not going to be on stage, but Stephanie Grisham will be. Adam Kinzinger, for example, will be. Olivia Troy, another former Trump administration official, will be. How resonant do you think that may be, not for the audience in this room, but for the audience at home?
Well, you're right. So the folks here, you know, they're just expecting sort of a pep rally. But I think that this creates the permission structure for some of the more moderate conservatives in these battleground states like Georgia, where Nikki Haley actually did get 70,000 votes in Metro Atlanta after she had actually dropped out. I think seeing people like Kinzinger, like Grisham, actually talking about supporting a Democrat for the country and not for the party is what offers that sort of permission structure for people to feel like they could possibly vote for or support Harris this year.
Of course, we're in Illinois, not known as a swing state, but just next door we've got, of course, Wisconsin, where Vice President Harris and Governor Walz will be. You've got Michigan, where former President Trump is today. You've got the state that you covered, Julia, and that's Pennsylvania, these critical Rust Belt battlegrounds, where some of the most recent swing state polling from New York Times Siena suggests that Vice President Harris is gaining ground or pulling even with the former president in ways that President Obama could not. Still inside the margin of error. Let's be very clear that there's still 70-plus days to go. But give me a sense of your reporting on the ground and what you're hearing when you talk to folks there in PA.
Yeah, I think Democrats in Pennsylvania feel like this is a whole new race. It is a whole new race. I've been at a lot of the delegation breakfasts this week, and I'll say that they feel the pressure of being from Pennsylvania, and they think it's still going to be an incredibly close race. Governor Josh Shapiro has been making the rounds as well, and he said similarly that, you know, they're feeling better, but it's a state that was won by less than 1 percentage point in 2016, a little more in 2020. So they're still feeling the pressure.
Perhaps the hardest hitting question I could ask you is how you managed to get to a delegation breakfast after how late things went last night. Truly. I mean, one of the things you bring up, I've heard in conversations with Democrats here, which is this idea that, and I've heard it from close advisors to the vice president, to the Harris-Walz campaign, they don't feel like this is in any way a victory lap. I think there is very much a sense, you use the word underdogs, they've used the word underdogs. The vice president has used the word underdog. That is how they see this race moving forward, because while there is some momentum and energy, when you talk to Trump campaign officials, they'll tell you it's a sugar high, it's a honeymoon. This campaign disagrees, but there's still an element of keeping that moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk of irrational exuberance, right? Suddenly you have a group of people that felt quite depressed about their nominee, not excited at all, and they've been given excitement. So, of course, they're out there, they're energized, you're hearing it in the room, but that room isn't going to represent Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or even these Sun Belt states. And you're right, the polls are convincing in the sense that she's doing better than Biden was against Trump, but she's not doing as well as Biden was doing at this time 4 years ago, or Hillary Clinton was doing 8 years ago. And that tells you that there's still a lot of room for Democrats to have to make up.
When we talk about November, and I call it election week, I feel like that's what it could be very well. You look at, you know, counting the votes, how long that's going to take, how close this thing could be. When you talk about Georgia, Maya, state that you cover, they just passed the state election board yesterday a new rule that requires election workers to closely scrutinize ballots. Critics suggest that could potentially further delay the process. How should we be thinking about that as we're looking ahead?
It creates an opportunity to sow more doubt in the results of the election. And I think that's the bottom line. There's a lot more partisanship that's being kind of inflected into this, the overseeing of these elections now in Georgia. And it's something to watch very closely. There's a real possibility that the race in Georgia will be another close one. And all of these things just make it a lot more difficult to actually see the results immediately on election night. So Democrats I've spoken to are really trying to let their voters know you have to turn out, of course, but also check your registration. Make sure that you know exactly being counted, and where it will be.
What does this say to you, Peter, about some of the post-election scenarios that Trump campaign officials, Trump allies, those in his orbit, maybe preparing for here and what that landscape looks like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, the biggest difference, of course, is he's not in the White House, right? He doesn't have control over the military, which he talked about declaring martial law with some of his advisors. He doesn't have control of the Justice Department. Obviously, these are big tools that he had available to him last time, not available to him this time. But he does have allies in places like Georgia, and that can make a difference in small ways. And it doesn't take much to make a difference in one of these battleground states where we saw, as you just said, a very small amount of votes can make a difference.
Julia, quick final thoughts to you. What should we be thinking about that we are not thinking about right now as it relates to critical states like the one that you covered?
I mean, I hate to say it's not an easy answer, but any little difference in any voting block in Pennsylvania could make a difference.
You're talking about half percentage point swing.
I'm talking about what happens in Philadelphia, in the suburbs, in small cities,
in Yardley, in Newtown,
rural areas. But I think that's why they're going to be in my state a lot.
Julia Trusa, thank you so much. Peter Baker, I think great to see all of you. Really appreciate it. If you haven't noticed, it's gotten kind of loud down on the floor behind me there. That's because we've seen yet another performance on stage. Jacob Soboroff has a front row seat for all of it. Are you loving it? Like, are you just having a dance party down there or what?
Sometimes we talk politics. Sometimes we do substance. Sometimes things are very serious. But I'm just in the front row because Common was just performing. I was watching Common, Chicago Zone. It was a pretty unbelievable performance. When you're here in the front and you have the privileges that we do to be on the floor, and it is a privilege, look how close it all is. So right there, you missed them by just a matter of seconds. Tonight, right there, about 15 feet away from where I'm standing, is where you're going to see President Obama, Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, the first gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. The excitement in this building, I know we've talked about it earlier this evening, is palpable, and it feels different than last night. Maybe on the account of the fact that everybody's here a little bit earlier because of the sort of snafus that logistical that came up last night, but also because I think people, the energy really just quite literally is building as we work towards Vice President Harris and Governor Walz coming out and addressing this crowd, even though they're in Milwaukee tonight. Speaking of Milwaukee, let's do a little walk, guys. Come with me. Hallie, when you and I spoke from the convention in Milwaukee, I recall it was a little cheesy, no pun intended, but I did make a visit to my friends in the Wisconsin delegation because they have the nicest accessory, I think, of anybody at any political convention, and that is the cheesehead. I was just going to go see the cheeseheads. Can I see the cheese? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's always maneuvering here. Thank you. Can I go that way? Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Hi, just coming up to say hi to the cheeseheads. Excuse us. Check it out, guys. Cheesehead, can I say hi to you? What's your name? Chris. Chris, you said? Chris. Yeah. Chris. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are in your hometown tonight, home state. How do you feel?
I'm excited for Milwaukee. My family is down there at Pfizer. I've got lots of friends down there. I'm sorry to be missing it, but I'll be here for the ultimate rally on Thursday.
So do you have a little FOMO that you're not going to see him tonight down there?
A little bit. Yeah, I'd love to be.
But let me tell you something. They know how important Wisconsin is. Look where they got you seated. I don't think there's a better seat in the House right now.
These are prime seats. This is unbelievable for me.
What's the number one issue for you this year in the election?
Reproductive rights.
Reproductive rights. Yes. So nice to talk to you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We'll catch up again soon. Hallie, take a look. I want to show you. Chris, just swing around and show her. This is the seat that the Wisconsin delegation has. I don't think you could get a much better seat than being in Wisconsin. And again, that goes to show the importance with which this campaign is putting in this delegation. Hallie?
Jacob Soboroff, definitely, I think, a better seat than the one that we have up here in the booth, but it's good to see you and your cheesehead friends down there on the floor. Jacob, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us for our special coverage here on NBC News Now. More coverage picks up from Chicago right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.